Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Geraldine Parent. I'm the Executive Director of the Okanagan Symphony, and I am happy and delighted to welcome you to our final episode of our Maestros Musings series this spring. And it is our final conversation. We're quite delighted about our guest speaker today. As you know, we've advertised this as a 30-minute conversation with a Q&A, and every session has been slightly different. So we may go over that extended time. If you have to leave, we are recording this session and we will update it and upload it, on our website following the session within a couple of days. And you can go back and review it as many times as you like. And if you've missed any of the previous sessions, they're still available for viewing. As you know, we're becoming more and more familiar with Zoom, but there's always some weird things that happen on any given day. So here, are the housekeeping kind of items around today's session. Please keep your microphones off during the session. Your videos can remain on or off, but we've all experienced if you run into some issues with your video or your internet is going in and out, sometimes turning your video off helps with that. While we would love to see you, we're going to hone in on our speakers. So you're welcome to do whatever you like in that regard. Please use the chat function for any questions or comments. And in your view, you might want to go to speaker view, which will again hone in on Rosemary and our guest speaker today. With that, I think we're going to turn it over to Rosemary to introduce our special guest for today.
Thank you, Geraldine, and welcome everybody. It's been such a joy for me to be hosting these Maestro Musings, and so inspired and excited by our guest this afternoon. I've long been an admirer, long before I met Timothy, and then had the great pleasure of serving on a faculty with him at an Opera Nuova program, and got to meet him and know him a little better, and was even more inspired. Timothy is the founding artistic director of Pacific Opera Victoria. In 1979, he had the vision to found that company, and it is an extraordinary company in Canada. Tim, I'm not just buttering you up when I say it's my favorite opera company in Canada, because I think the innovation that you have brought is really second to none. Your support of young artists, your creativity, your courage, and your risk-taking, the connection that you've made to community. And you might not know this, but I was on one of the BC Arts Council juries, where I was just blown away by the application and of the ways that you're connecting opera to so many different facets of your community. So that's my little fangirl moment. But with Pacific Opera Victoria, Timothy's conducted over 120 productions, which is a huge feat. He's also conducted many important Canadian premieres of operatic works. And he's conducted other opera companies across the country, including Opera de Montreal, Opera Calgary, and Opera Quebec. We have a long association with those three and every other opera company as well. What you might not know is that Timothy is also a renowned orchestral conductor, having served as music director in Regina Symphony, done a lot with his association with the McGill Symphony Orchestra, McGill University in Montreal, really put McGill on the map, touring a lot, especially into Carnegie Hall, and recording Mahler symphonies. So this is a huge accomplishment at a university orchestra level, and that reputation also has extended far beyond our country, that long association. Timothy has been recognized with honorary degrees from Royal Roads University and the University of Victoria. He is a recipient of the Diamond Jubilee Medal, the Opera Canada prestigious Ruby Award, and in 2008, he was named to the Order of Canada. Very well deserved. Please welcome, everyone, Timothy Vernon.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you for being here. So I'm going to jump right in because this is something that I love in my conducting career, and you're an inspiration for this in that you are equally at home conducting symphonic works and opera. And so just tell us a little bit about how do you approach them the same? What's the difference for you? How does one inspire the other? Just to let us know kind of your thoughts and passions about opera versus orchestra, or including orchestra.
I always used to be amused when colleagues might speak a bit dismissively of someone and say, oh, he's an opera conductor, as if you can conduct opera without understanding orchestra. It's insane. Of course, you have to understand orchestra thoroughly, and in some senses more thoroughly, Because as you will know, Rosemary, in conducting, yes, it's true, I've conducted Mahler symphonies. I love every minute, every bar, every note, but Die Fledermaus is harder. And to say that to someone, they look at you as if you're insane, but it's absolutely true. And why is it true? Because the symphonic repertoire, by and large, doesn't involve the same degree of rubato and the same degree of sixth sense in accompanying something. And that is what makes someone successful in opera, that you have control of the orchestra, but you have control of it in the way a pianist controls the keyboard, that you're ready to respond, and that the orchestra itself is ready to respond. The fact of the matter is, some of the great orchestras began in opera. The Vienna Philharmonic was an opera orchestra before it became a standalone concert. To this day, the Vienna Philharmonic has a special concert named for Otto Nicolai, the composer of many things, including the Merry Wives of Windsor, who took the orchestra out of the pit, put them on the stage, and gave concerts. This was revolutionary. So the standalone orchestra doesn't actually have the long history of the opera orchestra, because there's always been players involved in opera since 1598. I mean, hello. So yes, it's very important, if you're going to work in opera, to have a thorough grasp of the orchestra. And in conducting opera, this is where technique comes in. Many times, I mean, most of the big orchestras now, and we even have orchestras in Canada that can play most of the standard repertoire without a conductor. You start them, you stop them, there's a few things in between. But this in opera is where the conductor is, thank God, essential. There's at least one place. I'm a skeptic about this stuff. You know, I mean, I think of conducting, it's a very precarious way to make a living, waving your arms in the air, frankly.
And not making any sound.
And not making any sound. And does it really matter? In fact, waving your arms in the air probably only really matters at an airport where the planes are taking, you know, this anyway. So yes, the idea of opera orchestra, they're not distinct in my mind. The repertoire is the repertoire. There are things in symphonic repertoire that approach opera. You think of some of the bigger cantatas and the bigger choral works, of which the 19th century was very fond. And this requires that sense. In opera, you develop maybe a more refined feeling for the inner balance of the ensemble. Because in the orchestra, while the acoustic in a good concert hall can level things out and you don't have to work so hard, in opera, very often, you've got so many differences to be aware of. So the balance of the orchestra with the singers, always a big thing, always a big thing. In his last opera, Capriccio, by Strauss, which we performed, in which I spent 2 years making a reduction for our smaller 40-piece orchestra, when it's meant to be 110 or 20. And he asks all these wonderful, jokey opera questions. It's his time to unburden. And one of the things that comes up in the text is, why does the orchestra always drown out the singers? And of course, Strauss himself was known, if he didn't like the singer, he would say to the brass section, he'd say, "Louder, gentlemen, I could still hear the stage." Well,
I've heard that. Those poor sopranos.
That are involved, and it's about experience. Nobody walks into opera ready to go. It takes a long time. Most of the time, you start as a coach pianist. You learn the repertoire. When I'm learning a new work, the first thing I learn and try to memorize is the text.
Yep.
After that comes whatever else the composer has thought of and done. And again, as with everything, I was brought up old school in Vienna. I spent 11 years living in Europe, and my professor was one of the great teachers, and he was he was a real pedagogue, but he was a complete dogmatist. I mean, if you want something else, go somewhere else. Here it is. And his whole gospel was attention to detail and absolute thorough knowledge of the score, not any performance, the score. So when students ask me, and they do, so which Beethoven should I listen to? Which Beethoven? And I'll say, look, either none or all.
Or many.
Because you have to know the score first.
Yeah.
And you're not going to learn it from somebody else's idea of it. You'll never have your own if you do that.
Yeah,
And
I
of course,
totally agree.
performances in opera, particularly, opera is fraught with so-called traditions. I mean, Mahler, of course, schimpfed about traditions. He said, Tradition heißt Schlamperei. Tradition is sloppiness. And in opera, it's absolutely true, because many things that happen in opera happen because the singers can't cut it, because they haven't worked out their breathing. They don't have the technique to bring the long phrase. They need to turn around and take another breath before they hit a high note. All this stuff that is, means you have to pay attention to your technique. And when you don't, a famous singer can start a trend. Oh my God, Gali Curci, did you hear what she did when she hit the thing in the Norma and the Fermata and the, oh my God. And then
Now we're all going to do it that way.
And everybody sings it that way for 100 years because somehow a major singer has that authority. So I think for conductors, it's very important because it's your only place to stand. The only place to put your 2 feet is on the score itself.
Yeah. Come escrito.
We kind of
As
come
it's
along
written.
with them,
Yeah, but I appreciate what you say about recordings, because I do think in the students that I've worked with as well, that seems to be sometimes, not all the time, but that's where they think they need to go to get the information. And I totally agree. I think we are so lucky to have access to some of the great conductors, of course, and to see their interpretation and be inspired by them. But you're absolutely right. First, you need to develop your own.
The thing is not just abstractly have your own vision. That's not it. It comes from engagement with the score. Exactly. You sit with the score and you look at it and you try to figure out, what does this mean? And it's not just obviously the pitches, et cetera, et cetera. It's not even obviously the tempi. You come to certain cruces, certain crux passages where it's puzzling, where the composer doesn't always help you. He doesn't always make it the most explicit. Then you have to draw on a much deeper sense of notation and history of notation and so on and so forth. Even that sometimes, So what's interesting is when you're aware of these crux passages, changes of tempo, ensemble issues, blah, blah, blah. It's wonderful to be able to listen to 100 versions, how 100 different people have thought about the same thing and solved it, or not thought about it. Or not solved it. Right over it. Which is also very apparent if you know the score. So,
and sometimes really famous conductors, you think they just glossed over that and didn't even think
totally.
About it.
Another thing is people think, they put a lot of orchestra conductors like to put overtures on their program. And I swear I can tell when a conductor has not conducted the whole opera.
Right.
You can tell because they're even the ones that don't necessarily have thematic connections. It's about the course of the whole thing, the flow of the whole thing, the structure of the whole thing. Now, structure is a very old-fashioned word, but in the end, it's what it boils down to. You have to understand the bones of the composition. I mean, the beautiful skin and the lovely hair of the composition. What is the anatomy?
And that, I would say, structure is always my starting place when I'm approaching a score. And from structure for me is where I also make decisions about pacing. How do you approach a score, Timothy? I know you said, of course, for the opera, always with the text. But once that text is ingrained, or even if you're working with a score that's just instrumental, what's your process then? Do you have a specific process, or does it change depending on the repertoire?
Not really. I mean, I'm no pianist. But it is my go-to for getting through things. So I can play a score at the piano if I don't know it at all and get a sense of its general shape and themes and how that goes. But then I actually do a bar by bar analysis. What does that mean? Until mid and even late in the 20th century, most musical compositions have an inner structure, an even surface one, which you can look at to your benefit, consisting in clauses, phrases. It's like analyzing prose. There's a sentence. It has this clause, it has that clause, subordinate, how does it connect, where are the conjunctions, blah, blah, blah. A musical score is just like that. You can have, this is a phrase that lasts 8 measures. This is a phrase, as in Mozart very often, the last 5 measures, ooh, because it doesn't add up. We talk about Mozart's symmetry. And of course it isn't Haydn's symmetry, because Haydn is 8 plus 8. And Mozart is very often 7 plus 5, and ooh, but that makes it so lively, and that gives it an extra, almost a spontaneity from within. But you can take any score. You can take a Haydn score, and if you looked at many of my scores, you'll see little figures at the bottom. 4 bars, 4 bars, 2 bars, 6 bars, 7 bars, 8 bars, 4 bars. So I know by small sections how the bigger section is put together, and then how they connect. Sometimes they're contrasting. Sometimes they're repeated. Sometimes, in analyzing a variation, there'll be an ostinato figure that goes all the way through, or any of those things. A canon. Fugue is, of course, a very different thing because it doesn't go by bar, it goes by entry.
Voices.
And how that works and how composers think about it, they all differ. And they're not all, Bach is absolutely fantastic because it's the summation of a style of writing in its most intricate form. And it was all in his head before he put it on the paper, which is even more astonishing. And you can follow the structure of the thing. This is partly why you hear Glenn Gould humming when he's playing. Like he's thinking about, this phrase and this next line and what's the most important line and where, blah, blah, blah. So that's for me, the way of approach is analysis, not just sitting and listening to 25 recordings of it, which alas, I think one sees a lot now. Yeah. I don't know if you agree with me.
I do agree with you. And that's when you see that sort of surface level conducting the melody all the time, or not necessarily hearing the inner not hearing the inner workings or finding the cadence points. But I love when I'm approaching opera, I always, like you, go from the text, and I really take cues from the punctuation in the text. And I think phrasing all the time, but I haven't really thought about clauses and conjunctions in instrumental music. So I'm going to steal that in my next venture into a score, because I think about transitions, but thinking about them in different ways of transitioning. Are they connecting? Are they separating? And using kind of a grammatical structure for that, I think could be very helpful in
Wagner said he said so many great things, but one thing he said was, all of art is the art of transition. What could he possibly mean by that? Well, you have an idea, so you have a sentence, you have a line of poetry, you have a musical phrase that hovers in your mind, and you pin it down and put it on the page. Then what? How do you go to the next? I've got this new idea and I'm going to do this. And then what happens in between? And what happens in between is absolutely essential. I mean, you can have beautiful body parts, but if your sinews and your ligaments, these are silly similes, but if they don't work, you're going to be an awkward creature. And so, so the same thing in music. It's how does the composer go from here to there? What does he use? Does he use motifs? Does he use harmony? Does he modulate? How does he connect? How does he bind these things together? Because in the long run, until the 20th century, again, the idea of music was to create, the phrase, architecture is frozen music, right? Architecture, frozen music. Somebody found that the idea of a structure, and don't forget, architecture lives in space, music lives in time. It's far more elusive, but the idea of structure in music depends on memory. You have to understand when a piece starts where it's going to go, and you have to understand in retrospect where it's been, and you have to understand finally when it's over what shape and what life it had and what the composer intended by it. I think, Karajan was often given to these mystic ruminations, blah, blah, but he said something wonderful one time that stuck with me forever. He said, we come from the womb and go to the tomb. It's not a surprise that those rhyme. Those are two darknesses we don't know about. And then music comes out of silence. That's where it begins. And when it's over, it goes back into silence. So in a way, a performance is a rehearsal of our own mortality. That's pretty heavy and highfalutin sounding, but in fact, at a high level, he's not wrong.
No, I find that quite moving, actually. Thank you for sharing that. So, Timothy, I've heard you speak in various ways about art and how it impacts us in life. And it's too pedantic to think its purpose for us in life. But can you just share with us why you chose to come into this career, or did it choose you, and how it has evolved for you, the meaning of what art can bring to the world, especially in light of the year and a half we've all just lived through.
Oh, I think probably, how can I put it? I don't think I was thinking, when I was 18, I went to Vienna to study music. I studied initially to be a composer because I thought I was going to be one.
Oh, I did not know that.
Oh dear, yes. And of course, the thing about composing is, and I believe this, you have to do it. It's not a pastime.
Right.
It's like, take Beethoven's paper away, he'd die. If he couldn't write, if he couldn't put it on paper, if he couldn't compose, he'd die. The way Bach locked himself in a dark closet with a single candle and burned out his eyesight because he had to do it. If there was not a choice, it wasn't a choice. It wasn't, oh, I'll do it next week. It was ding. So when I found out about myself that I didn't have to compose music to be happy, it was horrible. It was crushing. It was my whole identity collapsing. But I also realized, because I'd had very good luck early in life, there was a wonderful man who was in charge of the Victoria Symphony when I was a boy living here. His name was OSO Müller.
Oh,
now OSO
wow.
Müller was in Victoria for 3 years. And for 2 of them, I was his private pupil. He took me by the scruff of my neck and decided I was going to be a conductor. Who knows?
What a great first mentor. Wow.
He became the greatest teacher in North America.
Yeah.
He was in charge of Juilliard and Curtis, and everybody in North America who wanted to be a conductor went to him. He was, again, a total autocrat. He brooked no discussion. This is how it goes. This is what you must know. This is what you must hear. He would do things like set me a composition. One time I remember this so well. It was the Siegfried Idyll, which a small orchestra can play. So it was.
We just played it here on May 1st.
Okay. So fine. So I'm sitting with Otto, and he says, close the score. Oh. So I closed the score. And he said, what does the viola play in the 20th measure?
Oh my God.
Well, I spent a lot of time studying it. So for me, it was a matter of going, then I was able to answer it. I wasn't entirely right, but I wasn't entirely wrong.
Okay.
And he was sort of like, but that was the kind of teacher he was. It was like unrelenting. And of course, at Juilliard and Curtis, all those people that studied with him, everybody revered and respected him. Very few people loved him. It's kind of sad. But that's how he was. That's how he was, Otto. So I was really lucky in having that in my back pocket. When I had this conniption fit about I'm not a composer after all, I didn't want to leave music. And I had this chance to go into the conducting class. So I auditioned for it. And it was a big deal. It was an 8-year program.
Oh.
Because of Otto and the studies I had, I finished it in 5. In addition to that, I studied with other people. I went to Italy 4 or 5 times to study with one of the greatest performing musicians of the 20th century that you will never have heard of. His name is Franco Ferrara, and he was Toscanini's concertmaster, among many other things, and a great conductor. Many people who worked with him said he was actually greater than Toscanini, better ears. and you believed it, because he was Sicilian, he was short, and as compared to Swarovski, who was all knowledge, he was a total walking encyclopedia who managed to be funny because he was witty, so it was never tiresome. But oh my God, information, please. Woo. Ferrara was like getting close to, you know what it's like when you get too close to the fire?
Yeah.
And your marshmallow goes, and your finger starts to hurt and everything. That's what he was like. It was like, he was like a burning thing. He was like the sun or some kind of, and of course he couldn't perform because he had something like epilepsy. And when he got too involved, he collapsed. And I've seen it happen. It's horrible and horrifying. This handsome, he was short and stocky and Sicilian, black eyes. And because of the condition, a kind of mask-like face. And he'd just look at you like this. But he was the great, and he could make any orchestra go through the roof with a couple of gestures because he was so intense. His intention, and that's a lot about what conducting is. Yeah. What you intend and conveying that intention. He did it in a small range of gestures. He wasn't up here and all over the place. It wasn't ballet. It was like now. And the orchestra would just sit up and they'd play for him like no one else. And I had great respect and reverence for all of my wonderful teachers that I've had, but when Ferrara, after a concert, I was the chosen one to do the final recital or something, you know. And Ferrara is the last time I saw him. He died shortly after this. And he came to me and he's not demonstrative. He gave me a hug, which I was almost like ready to faint. And then he said into my ear, he said, "Ho sentito la tua anima." I heard your soul. I thought, okay, I can die now, you know, almost. But it's certainly something that was the greatest thing any person has ever said to me that meant as much as it did, because
Yeah.
it came from him.
Well, knowing that he clearly put his soul into everything that he was
Oh
doing.
my God, you know.
And so he recognized that in you. So then, well, I had no idea that you had these experiences. I have goosebumps thinking about working with Otto von der Müller as a young man, almost young boy. So like I couldn't imagine you doing anything other than conducting, because I've only ever known you as a conductor. What has it brought you in your life personally, or being that connected to these great masterpieces of music? You know, how has it shaped your life and shaped the world?
Of course, musicians have a fantastic resource, which is the music itself.
Mm-hmm.
And you, I'm sure like me, are not in need of listening to any given performance to have the most profound experience. In fact, often it's opening the page and seeing what's there from Mozart, seeing what's there from Bach, seeing what's there from Mahler, seeing what's there from Schoenberg or Berg. You know, this is incalculable in terms of enrichment. You asked about art in the bigger picture, and I think there's no easy formulation, but in my view, art is the single greatest blessing we create for ourselves. It is a kind of spiritual diary of mankind. It tells us a deeper truth about how we feel about our place in the world and how we connect to it. And of course, it varies and it changes through the ages, and styles change and all of those things. But the basic impulse in creation is to document consciously the living self, the composer, like any creator, saying, I was here. It's like Kilroy, you know, Kilroy was here. Sort of a great work of art is like a hugely extended, magnificent Kilroy was here. But more than that, because of all the unconscious elements that well up and go into the creation of a piece,
Right.
It is revelatory. It opens understanding of our fellow man, and probably even most importantly, of ourselves. And don't forget the classical injunction that the unexamined life is not worth living. Know thyself, Socrates said. And art is one way to help us know ourselves. And to me, that's as big a function as anything. And it's in some ways more important than entertainment, which is important. Please, hey, I live in the theater, so entertainment, I understand. But beyond that, and I don't mean to get too philosophical and it's not a substitute for religion, although in the 19th century, that's surely what it became. And that secularized kind of, in fact, you know, the Vienna Philharmonic having its concerts on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock is not a coincidence. You know, it's like you go there as to the mass. Kind of. That can be overdone, but it is an aspect. It is absolutely an aspect of one's deeper experience of art, and particularly the greatness of our best composers.
You know, so many great thoughts. I'm just trying to think where to go with you. I want to, you've talked a little bit about an approach to certain repertoire and style. How do you feel the last 50 years of writing has taken it? Where do you think it's taken us? How do you approach more contemporary works as compared to how you approach Beethoven or Mozart?
I think the idea of style blew up in the 20th century. And suddenly it used to be, if you think about 19th century music. There's a core repertoire in the middle that everybody is consenting to. These are the great things, whether it's French or German, even a bit of English, that are essential works. And then the less important ones, but there was a core. There was something that you knew was at the center. The center couldn't hold, as Yeats said, in the 20th century. And when it blew apart, you have parallel styles, all with claims, some historical claims, but claims to a central voice. And instead of, if you took a cross section, it's like old wood with a core in the middle and rings around it. Now you do a cross section and it's all kind of parallel rings. It's not concentric, right? And that's something you have to think about in approaching, because even starting in the 30s, 40s, notation itself, the tradition of notation started to shift with people's desire to express more than the old notation would allow them somehow to put down on the paper. Now, I personally believe that we've seen the end of writ large Renaissance culture, 500 years. That's it. I think it's done. And I think the last 50 years anyway, has been a transition period from which no real consensus has yet emerged, and maybe won't, which is something we have to think about and be ready for. Maybe these structural pieces, the idea of a coherent voice, the idea of an independent being in the piece itself, is gone with a society that was based on those beliefs. Don't forget, not all the great composers of the past were deeply religious, but they all understood an order. There's an order in nature. Like there was the great chain of being, and the antique philosophers knew about and wrote about. Shakespeare had a great sense of order. In fact, order is his cardinal preoccupation, right? So that sense of order has certainly shifted, and certainly, I won't say it's toppled, but it's much weaker, and it becomes more arbitrary. And the will to express, which had in its roots a romantic ambition, Mozart, it didn't occur to Mozart that he was self-expressing all the time, although he was very aware of his genius. But by the time you get to Beethoven, he knew, and that was it. And it's listen to me. And the extension of that is anti-structuralism, because the personality, the individuality becomes more important. And this is why Wagner became such a huge, controversial cataclysm. It's not about whether you like him or not. It's what he brought shook everybody's sense of what art was about. And you couldn't ignore it. And if you tried to, like Brahms, you could still be a great composer. But somehow you were a little bit of a sidebar to history, And that sense of the individual has really continued into our current times, and that's where it is. So you have to treat the works more or less individually, because it's not like I've learned 5 Haydn symphonies, the next 5 I'm going to know more about starting out.
Yeah. Each one.
Is that helpful? I don't know.
No, I think it really is. And I mean, so here we are coming out of, knock wood, coming out of not totally unprecedented, but certainly unprecedented in our lifetimes, this, 16 month of shutdown where we have not been able to engage in live music making in the way that we have. How do you feel about coming out of that and into a new, are we entering a new era of orchestral and operatic exploration, do you think?
Well, certainly I think that the restrictions that COVID has brought has forced everything into a different dimension and dynamic. If anything, it's made those experiences more intimate. So where we haven't had, Missa Solemnis with the 250 chorus members, we've had to focus on a trio and think about that. And I think that's beneficial in a way, because it takes it away from the mass effect from that, as I said, entertainment, and makes us appreciate and focus in on the elements of musical art. Now, nobody's more anxious than I am to get back in the theater.
I
And
am.
there is no substitute. And live music is live music. You can do what you want. You can have the best stereo system in the world. You can blah, 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 blah. But I was just reading Alex Ross in the New Yorker about going to the first New York Phil concert. And he said how the impact of being in a closed room listening to music was almost overwhelming because there hadn't been any for so long. And the impact of it, it didn't stop him from being a little bit critical about this and that, but the impact, the essential feeling, the communicative feeling. And I always feel that, every performer feels that. I'm interested, as you know, sure, everybody shows off. Every performer has a show off in him somewhere, but consciously, I've come to a point where my ambition is to share with the audience what I've discovered. Listen to this. How exciting is this? How wonderful, how different is this? So that moment, that communicative moment, I think is essential. And COVID has done a lot to bring us a bit away from that and to create like all the technology. It's sort of like the mask we have to wear. Yeah. It has a distancing effect. It's still there. We still hear music. It's still wonderful. But the liveness of it, the being in the same space, the sense the audience has that this is being done for us right now, that's irreplaceable.
The art in time, right? Existing in time. So Timothy, you've just once again inspired me. Have you written a book?
No, I'm not. I keep getting asked. That's probably because I talk so much, you know.
Well, but you really
shut up and write it down.
Yeah, you have an ability to put in words so beautifully. You capture so much that is also often elusive to put into words. And every time I hear you speak, I feel that way. So I'm just so grateful that you were able to join us today. I do want to ask you one last question. I don't think we have any questions from our patrons, do we, Geraldine? Everybody's just so transfixed, they're not thinking about questions. But I want to ask you, what are you most looking forward to coming up in your future seasons? You know, knocking on wood that we're able to do what we're planning to do.
Well, we had a season that was completely postponed, and I'm looking at my watch because I have to go in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, so just tell me that one last thing and I'll let you go.
So our last season, which we postponed in its entirety, was Carmen, Don Giovanni, and Death in Venice, Benjamin Britten. So those three, we've done a lot of Britten. We've done more Britten than any other company in the country, really. And he's so magnificent.
I know, he's my favorite.
Phaedra, I just recorded Phaedra and Serenade, which will be on the Pacific Opera website if you look later in the month, I think. We
will link it for our listeners.
So that idea of that season, but going beyond that, we had a big project, which was Die Walküre. We'd already done Das Rheingold, using a reduction made in Wagner's lifetime by a young composer, Alphonse Abbas, 2 B's, 2 S's. And it worked. He took Wagner's 38 players and cut it in half, the winds and brass. And then however many strings you got, go. Yeah. And all the little European houses, they play the ring.
Then they can do it, sure.
They can't field 90 people or 120 people. So we don't have that habit. We think Wagner, 16 first violins, which he stipulates in the score, 16 first violins. How many orchestras in Canada have 16 first violins?
Maybe Montreal.
Not even.
Yeah.
And in effect, especially in a smaller house, the strings become like a chocolate sauce that's poured over the whole score, and the singers are. Anyway, never mind. That's what I'm looking forward to. We've got Valkyrie out there somewhere in our future.
Okay, well, I'm hopping on the ferry and I'm coming out. I'll be in the front row.
Well, it's great to see you, Rosemary. Thank you for the invitation. And greetings to all of you. I'm impressed by your sheer numbers. That's just great that you want to come and hang out for a bit. And keep supporting the orchestra. Keep supporting whatever opera activity you see in your neighborhood. Be there for it. Make sure that it continues. Make sure that COVID hasn't throttled it or strangled it. And it's really you who make the difference. I'm not kidding. It's just, so be there.
Thank you so much, Timothy. What an inspiration you are in this time as we see that light at the end of the tunnel. And I cannot wait to see your next performance. Just take care of yourself and just keep staying in the music, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Sorry,
Take care,
gotta go.
Timothy.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.